Alright, welcome to the Ultimate Marvel Rivals Duelist Positioning Guide. We're breaking down every single duelist in the game, their strongest zones, their pressure spots, and exactly where they shine on the battlefield. Whether you're climbing the ranks or just want to master how duelists control space and collapse fights, this is the video that changes how you see every engagement. We're talking flanks, off angles, high grounds, backline setups, and mid-front pushes. Every position that matters with detailed percentage breakdowns to show exactly where you should be and when. So if you've ever asked yourself, where should I actually be standing? This one's for you. Let's dive in.
Let's talk Black Panther, the master of silent lethality. When it comes to positioning, he thrives on flanks, 35%, and off angles, 25%. The shadow paths of the battlefield where he can isolate, eliminate, and vanish before anyone realizes what happened. Flanking gives you access to the enemy's soft spots, while off angles let you pressure from unexpected lines without fully committing. Together, that's 60% positional synergy, where Black Panther becomes a surgical nightmare. Quick bursts, quick exits. Why not high ground? He doesn't need it. His value isn't in sight lines, it's in disruption. He does spend 20% mid-front when engaging directly to clean up or duel at close range, but if you're hanging around the main fight too long, you're wasting his potential. Backline and high ground? Minimal, 10% each. You're not sniping, you're not babysitting. If you're standing still, you're doing it wrong. Best recommendation? Start wide, loop around the side of the fight, using your movement tools and timing to stay unpredictable. Wait for the chaos, then dive onto their backline with precision. Your job isn't just to kill, it's to unbalance the enemy team so hard they crumble before they can recover. That's elite Black Panther gameplay.
Meet Black Widow, the queen of calculated lethality. Her entire game is built around off angles, 35%, and high ground, 30%, and when those two align, she becomes a silent executioner with total control over the battlefield. That's 65% positional synergy, and it's where Widow operates at her absolute best. Off angles let her line up shots without exposing herself to the frontline brawl. Add high ground to that, and she gains the vision and distance to land consistent picks with minimal risk. That's where Widow shines, out of reach but always in control. She'll flank on occasion, about 15% of the time when she sees an opportunity to close in for a quick burst and escape. But she's not a dive assassin. Widow's power comes from precision and timing, not reckless aggression. Mid-front and backline? Only 10% each. If you're standing with your tanks or tuck behind supports, you're wasting her angles. She's not there to follow the fight, she's there to shape it. Best recommendation? Before the fight even starts, find a rooftop or elevated ledge at an angle to the main lane. From there, keep a constant eye on vulnerable targets, pick your moment, and take them out before they know where you are. You're not chasing fights, you're ending them before they begin. That's how Black Widow takes control.
Let's talk Hawkeye, the king of precision and pressure. When it comes to positioning, he thrives in two zones: off angles, 35%, and high ground, 25%. And guess what? These two link perfectly. High ground gives you sight lines, but it's the off-angle positioning that turns those sight lines into lethal pick potential. Together, that's 60% positional synergy. When you're perched on a rooftop or platform that's not in the main lane, you're exactly where Hawkeye becomes deadly. Why not flank more? He does flank about 20% of the time, when you need to collapse on the backline or force a DPS duel. But too much flanking makes you a trade liability. You're fragile. Your value is in staying alive and repeating pressure. Mid-front and backline, minimal returns, only 10% each. If you're stuck there, you're either retreating or mispositioned. Hawkeye doesn't want to be with the tanks, and he's not a pure backliner. He's the edge of the fight executioner, always poking from weird angles the enemy forgets to check. Best recommendation? Start every fight by taking an off-angle high ground near mid-map, something that gives you sight over the enemy's support and squishies. From there, charge arrows, land picks, and reposition before they find you. You're not just damaging, you're controlling where they look and where they stand. That's elite Hawkeye gameplay.
Introducing Hela, the dark tactician of chaos and control. Her power lies in clever off-angle pressure, 30%, and sharp reactive flanks, 25%. A duo that gives her 55% positional synergy and turns her into a slow-burning threat that chips away at the enemy's confidence.
Off angles let her land persistent damage and chip away at grouped enemies, while flanks give her the space to sneak in a backline burst or finish off a weakened support. She doesn't dive like an assassin, she erodes the team structure from unexpected lines. She sees 20% mid-front time when the team's pushing hard and her cooldowns are up, just enough to contribute directly before slipping back to safety. Hela's not built for standing tall and trading blows, she's built for warping attention and creating fear. Backline and high ground, 10% each. She doesn't snipe, and while she can peek from elevated ground, it's not her strength. Her real edge comes from being everywhere you don't expect. Best recommendation? Start wide, pressure from a side angle, and rotate quickly between backline picks and lane pressure. Use chaos to your advantage. Force the enemy to turn their heads just long enough for you to strike. That's how Hela bends the fight to her will.
Enter Human Torch, the aerial menace who turns the skies into a furnace. His positioning sweet spot is clear. High ground, 35%, and off-angle zones, 25%. That's 60% positional synergy, and it's where Torch burns brightest, raining fire from above while staying just out of reach. High ground isn't just optional for Torch, it's essential. It gives you the vertical freedom to drop fire fields, harass with flame bursts, and reposition with ease. Pair that with off angles, and you're constantly hitting from positions the enemy isn't watching. He'll flank or push mid-front 20% of the time, usually when diving in with his cooldowns ready to clean up or pressure a group. But the second your abilities are down, you want to be back above the fight, not in it. Backline? Just 10%. You're not a support. You're not there to follow the group. You're there to ignite it from the outside in. Best recommendation? Open fights from rooftops or hover routes that give you full sight of the enemy backline. Torch is at his best when he's setting zones ablaze, forcing the enemy to reposition before they even fire a shot. That's how Human Torch keeps the heat on. Now stepping in, Iron Fist, the close-range disruptor who thrives on momentum and isolation. His ideal zones? Flank at 35% and off-angle at 25%, giving him 60% positional synergy where he can strike hard, fast, and vanish before retaliation ever lands. Flanking is where Iron Fist does his best work, getting behind the enemy line, singling out a squishy, and unloading with combo pressure. Off angles give him the freedom to harass from unexpected sides, build pressure, and dash in when the opening presents itself. He'll spend about 20% mid-front when he's fully charged and looking to finish off grouped enemies with clean burst windows, but stay there too long and you'll burn out. His strength isn't in long trades, it's in perfectly timed punches that shift momentum. Backline and high ground, 10% each. He doesn't hover, he doesn't hang back. If you're not actively moving around the fight, you're throwing away your value. Best recommendation? Start wide, rotate tight, and strike where it hurts. Iron Fist isn't about playing safe. He's about disrupting rhythm, finding cracks, and hitting with intent. That's how Iron Fist seizes the moment.
Say hello to Iron Man, the high-tech tactician who thrives on angle control and vertical dominance. His two strongest zones are off angles, 30%, and high ground, 30%, combining for a 60% positional synergy that lets him control space, pressure squishies, and unload unibeam from unexpected vantage points. Off angles give Tony the space to poke, zone, and rotate, keeping pressure on the enemy without drawing too much fire. Add high ground, and you've got a consistent stream of damage raining down with full visibility, perfect for lining up his beam or clearing lanes with repulsors. He'll dip into mid-front 15% of the time, especially when your tank needs help bursting down a target. But you're not built for soaking pressure, you're built to manipulate it. Backline, just 5%. Flanks get 15%. Useful for sneaking in surprise beams or picking soft targets, but still secondary to your angles. If you're sitting deep with your healers, you're wasting your range in flight. Iron Man isn't a background character, he's the one controlling the tempo from just the right distance. Best recommendation? Take flight. Find a sharp angle above the enemy's eye line and lay down controlled fire. Iron Man doesn't rush into battle, he glides around it, constantly repositioning until the perfect beam opens up. That's how Iron Man outplays the front line and outlasts the fight.
Introducing Magik, the ruthless gap closer who warps across the battlefield with blade in hand and carnage on her mind. Her strongest positions are flank 30% and off angle 25%, giving her a 55% positional synergy that lets her appear where the enemy is weakest and disappear before they can respond. Flanks are her playground. That's where she lands those sudden portal dives, isolating priority targets with brutal combos. Off angles let her linger just far enough from the fight to bait cooldowns or pressure the backline without fully committing. She'll rotate into mid-front 20% of the time, especially when fights are already underway and her team needs that decisive finisher. But standing around too long? That's not Magik. She's not built to hold a lane, she's built to break it. Backline and high ground, 10% each. She can jump up to ledges, sure, but that's a means to an end, not a place to live. And the allied backline, that's not your home. You're not there to hover with supports, you're there to be behind their backline where you start deleting real problems. Best recommendation? Start just outside vision. Use angles the enemy isn't watching. When the moment strikes, open a portal, commit hard, and get out just as fast. Magik isn't here to dance. She's here to end the music. That's how she dominates chaos.
Here comes Mr. Fantastic, the elastic enabler who bends fights to his will, literally. His best zones are flank, 30%, and off angle, 25%, giving him a 55% positional synergy that lets him stretch into danger, create chaos, and still slip away before things snap back. Flanks are where Reed shines. His elongated reach and elastic punches let him disrupt enemy lines from behind without overcommitting. Off angles give him the freedom to harass and pull from unpredictable directions, forcing enemy movement and setting up picks for the team. You'll see him 20% mid-front when it's time to collapse or drag a target in for a burst. He can take heat briefly, but Mr. Fantastic isn't a brawler. He's a space manipulator, not a sponge. Backline and high ground, just 10% each. He's not made to sit back and poke, and while he can play from height when needed, his strength is in stretching through chaos, not hovering above it. Best recommendation? Stay mobile, strike from angles they're not checking, and pull key targets right into your team's jaws. Reed isn't about brute force, it's about pressure, angles, and disruption. That's how Mr. Fantastic twists a fight in your favor.
Enter Moon Knight, the relentless duelist who thrives on chaos and burst momentum. His prime positioning zones are flank 35% and off angle 25%, giving him a 60% positional synergy that lets him slip in from the sides, explode onto targets, and vanish before the dust settles. Flanks are where Moon Knight thrives. That's how he finds the backline, forces isolated duels, and uses his multi-stance combo flow to punish any lapse in awareness. Off angles let him pressure without diving too deep, baiting movement and cooldowns before he commits. You'll catch him in mid-front about 20% of the time, usually during cleanup phases or when diving alongside the team. But he's not a shield soaker. He's a finisher who lives off of momentum, not brute force. Backline and high ground, 10% each. He's not here to babysit supports or float above the action. He's most dangerous when he's on the move, weaving chaos from the shadows. Best recommendation? Set up wide. Keep rotating until you find an exposed target, then strike hard and fast. Moon Knight doesn't need the perfect team comp, he just needs the perfect moment. That's how Moon Knight hunts in the dark.
Now, diving in, Namor, the sovereign bruiser who crashes fights like a tidal wave. His positioning leans toward off angles, 30%, and flanks, 25%, combining for a 55% positional synergy that lets him displace, pressure, and overwhelm from directions the enemy isn't prepared for. Off angles let Namor throw out his summoned octopuses, creating denial zones that disrupt sight lines and force enemy movement. On the flank, these pressure tools become even deadlier, especially when paired with a Gamma Octopus during a hook team-up. You're not bursting targets, you're suffocating space around them. He spends about 20% of his time mid-front, supporting the push with his durability and layered AoE control. He can take some heat, but he isn't a frontline tank. He's more of a space controller who thrives just outside the core brawl. Backline and high ground, 10% each. His evasive swim ball movement lets him reposition quietly, but he's not mobile enough to stay detached, and he's certainly not built for Overwatch or City behind the team. Best recommendation? Pick a side angle, flood it with tentacle pressure, and force the enemy to reposition. Once they're cornered or split, collapse with your team. Namor doesn't dive in blindly, he drowns the battlefield slowly until there's no air left to breathe. That's how he asserts control. Introducing Phoenix, the burning force of rebirth who controls the flow of battle from above.
Her strongest positions are high ground 35% and off angles 25%, giving her a 60% positional synergy that turns her into a hovering menace, always watching, always pressuring, always ready to detonate the fight. High ground is non-negotiable for Phoenix. From above, she controls space with her sustained AoE damage and burst potential. Off angles let her cast safely and catch enemies outside their defensive setups, especially when setting up multi-target combos. She'll play mid-front around 20% of the time, usually during team pushes, where she can follow up on crowd control or pressure grouped enemies. But you don't want to stay there. Phoenix burns brightest when she's just out of reach, forcing movement with her presence. Backline and flanking, 10% each. She's not built to sneak or to sit. The allied backline is too passive for her, and the enemy's backline is too risky. Her strength comes from elevation and angle, not surprise. Best recommendation? Take a high, offset position near the fight. Control zones with her burn, apply pressure from a diagonal, and wait for the moment to dive bomb the enemy's core. Phoenix isn't a passive caster. She's a looming threat that changes the rhythm of the fight. That's how Phoenix keeps the pressure rising.
Say hello to Psylocke, the blink and strike specialist who thrives on disruption and surprise. Her dominant zones are flank, 35%, and off angle, 25%, giving her a 60% positional synergy built entirely around striking from unexpected places and punishing hesitation. Flanks are where Psylocke unloads, teleporting in, applying burst pressure, and vanishing before the enemy can stabilize. Off angles give her space to poke with projectiles, force repositioning, and bait key cooldowns before diving. She spends about 20% of her time mid-front, usually during fast team collapses or when locking down a target with her psionic dash, but linger too long and you risk trading out. Psylocke works best when she's fluid, not planted. Backline and high ground, 10% each. She can peek from a ledge or float through the rear if needed, but that's not where she thrives. You want her moving like smoke, never where she was a second ago. Best recommendation? Start fights from unpredictable angles. Wait for distraction, then blink in, combo clean, and vanish. Psylocke isn't about long engagements. It's about slicing through the moment before it closes. That's how Psylocke owns the pressure game.
Now entering the fight, Scarlet Witch, the arcane artillery who bends reality through pressure and presence. Her strongest zones are mid-front, 25%, and backline, 25%, giving her a balanced 50% synergy between casting supportively and stepping up for aggressive burst when the moment's right. From the backline, she can safely unleash chaotic ranged attacks, build spell pressure, and combo into her crowd control without exposing herself. When things heat up, stepping into the mid-front gives her the angles in proximity to land big bursts and follow up on enemy clumps. She'll shift to off-angle and high ground 15% each, especially when looking to poke safely or set up multi-target explosions. While not her default, these zones add variety to her playmaking. Flanking? Just 10%. Scarlet Witch isn't built to dive or isolate. She controls the fight from the edge, not from the shadows. Best recommendation? Position just behind your tank or slightly to the side, giving you both pressure and safety. Witch thrives in controlled chaos, layering spells, denying space, and collapsing fights before the enemy can react. That's how Scarlet Witch warps the battlefield in her favor.
Swinging in next, Spider-Man, the agile disruptor who turns every corner, wall, and angle into an opportunity. His optimal positioning falls between off angles, 30%, and flanks, 25%, creating a 55% positional synergy that plays to his strengths: unpredictability, pressure, and relentless movement. Off angles let Spidey harass safely, land web shots, and build pressure while staying just outside of enemy focus. Flanks open the door for isolations, displacements, and backline picks, where his combos can really shine. He spends about 20% of the time mid-front, especially when diving with his team or capitalizing on a stunned enemy. But you never want to stay there long. Spider-Man's power lies in movement, not in brawling. High ground and backline, 10% each. He can scale and swing, sure, but camping rooftops or hiding near supports won't win fights. You want him above, behind, and beside the fight, never static. Best recommendation? Always keep moving. Swing to an angle, poke, and shift again. Use your mobility to disrupt formations, displace key targets, and frustrate anyone trying to keep track of you. Spider-Man doesn't just fight the enemy, he outpaces them completely.
Next up, Squirrel Girl, the unpredictable brawler who overwhelms with speed, AoE disruption, and relentless pressure. Her strongest zones are flank, 30%, and off-angle, 25%, giving her a 55% positional synergy built for chaos, distraction, and control. Flanks are where she shines, darting in, landing well-timed acorn throws to root enemies in place, and creating quick openings for follow-up damage. Off-angles let her poke with acorns, apply steady AoE pressure, and bait out movement without overcommitting. She'll swing through the mid-front about 20% of the time, usually when things break into a tight brawl and she's cleaning up with high-impact combos. But she's not a lane holder, she's a disruptor, keeping enemies off rhythm and out of formation. High ground and backline, 10% each. While she can reposition with vertical mobility or fall back for a reset, she's not meant to play it safe. Her ultimate Squirrel Swarm is reserved for high-pressure moments, not her main form of poke. Best recommendation? Work the sides, toss acorns to soften up targets, and strike fast when the moment feels off balance. Squirrel Girl doesn't win fights with perfect setups, she wins them by throwing everything off script. That's how she makes the battlefield hers.
Meet Star-Lord, the high-octane gunslinger who dominates with movement and mid-range pressure. His ideal positioning is off angles 30% and flanks 25%, giving him 55% positional synergy to punish enemies from unexpected directions. Off angles let Peter apply steady fire and recharge from cover without getting caught out. Flanks enable surprise engagements and backline harassment. From these positions, he uses element guns, Stella shift dodge, and rocket propulsion to weave in and out with precision. He spends about 20% mid-front, diving in during team pushes or to finish off weakened foes. That's your moment to make a play, but don't get stuck. High ground and backline, 10% each. He can hover briefly using rocket propulsion and dodge vertically, but camping up high isn't where he shines. And hiding behind healers, he's too reliant on angles and tempo for that. Best recommendation? Play the edges. Slide into off angles, poke, then flank when targets overextend. Use rocket propulsion and stellar shift to control space and surprise enemies. Star-Lord isn't about staying in one spot. He's about shifting the battlefield each second.
Say hello to Storm, the weather-wielding duelist who controls space from the skies, but knows exactly when to descend and support. Her optimal zones are off angles, 25%, and high ground, 35%, giving her a 60% positional synergy that lets her dominate with piercing wind blades and team-wide buffs. High ground gives Storm line of sight to rain down bolts and build her ultimate, while off angles keep her pressure consistent without being in direct sight. Together, these zones make her a fortress of area control. She'll move to mid-front about 20% of the time, maximizing her Thunder Mode buffs and following up dive engages, right where her aura and piercing attacks shine best. But hover high all fight? Not ideal. Storm's weather control is a sphere. Flying too high shrinks the buff range, so staying just above your team lets you buff allies while still raining damage. Flank and backline? 10% each. She can reposition or chase a straggler if needed, but her role is never to isolate or sit back. She needs clear angles and active presence to maximize her value. Best recommendation? Take an elevated perch behind your front line. Use Tornado Mode early to speed up pushes, then switch to Thunder Mode as fights develop. Land piercing wind blades through grouped enemies, pop Goddess Boost when cooldown allows, and dive in with your Omega Hurricane when the enemy's clustered. You're not just a flyer, you're a skybound anchor.
Lock in on the Punisher, the no-frills enforcer who wins with angles and discipline. His strongest zones are off angles 25%, backline 25%, and mid-front 25%. Off angle plus backline gives him 50% synergy when he's locking long sightlines safely. Off angle plus mid-front gives another 50% synergy when he steps up to pressure, while still shooting from a diagonal, not the choke. And when he does move into that off-angle mid-front zone, he's not just playing safe. He can pull out his shotgun and deal some mean close-range damage, catching overconfident enemies off guard. He uses high ground 15% to stretch lanes and maintain cover-to-cover fire, and only flanks 10% when rotating or escaping. He's not an assassin, he's a marksman. Best recommendation? Park yourself just off the main lane, close enough to support the push, far enough to peel back. Hold corners, peek, punish, reposition.
Punisher doesn't outdash anyone, he out-angles them with relentless, accurate fire.
Meet Winter Soldier, the precise tactician who excels at repositioning enemies and controlling mid-range engagements. His strongest positioning zones are mid-front, 25%, off-angle, 30%, and backline, 25%, giving him an impressive 55% positional synergy when combining mid-front plus off-angle or off-angle plus backline depending on the situation. Off-angle, 30%, is where Bucky lines up shots with his piercing blaster and sets up ideal bionic hook pulls. From there, he can yank a target into his team or isolate a squishy, his signature move. Backline positioning allows him to anchor lanes and punish enemy flyers, especially using slow effects and knockdowns from his arm abilities. Combining mid-front plus off-angle, approximately 55%, lets him confidently step up to deliver even more damage, often mixing in Trooper's Fist uppercut to finish or disengage. He uses high ground for 10% to stretch sightlines and reposition defensively, and flanks more for repositioning or catching straight targets, not deep dive engagements. Best recommendation? Play near corners or cover to angle into mid-front. Keep your hook primed to displace and use arm abilities in tight combos for maximum burst. Winter Soldier doesn't rush head-on. He dictates the tempo by pulling fights onto his terms, one precise shot at a time.
Stepping out of the shadows, Wolverine, the relentless tank shredder who knows how to turn enemies into lifesteal fuel with pinpoint precision. Strong positioning zones are flank, 35%, and off-angle, 25%, giving you 60% positional synergy. Perfect for ambushing heavy targets with surprise and speed. When you flank, you dive on squishy or tank enemies, using Feral Leap to pull them into your team. Thanks to the Phoenix team-up, your Leap now applies heavy burns and 25 to 35% lifesteal, especially when you drag the target into the enemy team, maximizing your sustain and chaos potential. He'll spend 20% mid-front when initiating on grouped enemies or diving with teammates, but won't stay. His value lies in hit and run. High ground and backline, 10% each, used for positioning flanking routes or drying out pressure, not for camping. Best recommendation? Stick to shadowy edges, loop behind, and dive on heavy targets. Pull them away from their front line and into your burning field. You're not just diving, you're feeding on chaos, regenerating health, and forcing fights on your terms. That's how Wolverine dominates the battlefield.
And there you have it, the ultimate Marvel Rivals Duelist Positioning Guide. Every duelist, every position, broken down with percentages so you know exactly where to be and when. If this helps shift the way you think about space, angles, and control, smash that like button, sub for more breakdowns, and drop a comment telling me your favorite duelist and how you play them. More guides, more deep dives, more ways to outplay, coming soon. Until then, keep rotating wide, pressure smart, and win the map before the fight even begins. Catch you in the next one.